Today, we're gonna make this. Hey, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're gonna make a pouch style sheath for this knife that I'm finishing up here. The sheath will have molded wings at the top to act as a keeper, keep the knife in place, and we'll have a cross draw loop wrapped around the center. So for the carving, I have a piece of kieranite that I'm probably going to mount on this knife when I finish it up. So what I'm thinking of doing is a pulled or torn flesh look, which is rather easy to do with minimal tools. So on this test piece here, you can see this is the effect that I'm going to go with. So let's get started. Okay, so we've drawn out one side of our template. We have our center line here and left an 1/8 inch gap where the fold will take place and just thumb riser is on the spine. We need that gap there because when we fold this is going to get tight up in here. On the other side, we have our 1/2 inch welt and made sure to keep a straight transition up in here so we don't have any pinching when we insert the knife. Up in here, we went ahead with the ergonomics, or followed the ergonomics of the handle, came up, and created some wings for our keeper up in here. So now what we need to do is cut out our side, scribe the center line to aid in folding the template so we can trace and trim out the full profile. But I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the tip of this sheath and I'm not feeling it. I don't feel that it goes with the design or profile of the tip of this knife. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come in and I'm going to pinch the tip. I'm going to come in, I'll pinch the tip there. That way I can have a welt that comes up and transitions here to help capture this tip of the knife when it gets inserted. And it also, it's going to leave a little bit of an embellishment up in here because we'll come around and we'll follow stitching up through here. So let's get to it. Okay, so I let the leather case overnight in the refrigerator to limit any evaporation and allow the moisture to equalize throughout the sheath. Normally, this process takes place within a few hours, but there's no harm done if you let the leather sit sealed up in the fridge for a longer period of time. At this point, we'll begin transferring over our carving template using a small stylus. If this is your first time visiting the channel or viewing one of my leather tutorials, then I highly recommend watching my leather sheath tutorial in the upper right, as it provides more detailed explanations to some of the beginning processes that I've already used here. All right, enough talking. Let's get started with our carving outline. So I'm going to try something different with this tutorial, since once I start the main carving, I'm going to be focused on tooling it out pretty quickly. There's a lot of carving on this piece, and I want to avoid having to re-wet the leather too often due to the leather drying out. So what I've done is I have a scrap piece here that I transferred part of the template over to, and I'm going to go step by step and show you the carving process that's pretty much going to be used throughout the whole sheath. So to begin, we want to grab a textured and a smooth beveler. What I'm using here is a number 936 textured beveler. This is for carving the relief around the holes in the flesh in here. A B935, yep, that's it here. A B935 smooth beveler is going to be used to add relief where the pools are in the flesh here. So because this is going to be more or less the skin, we want to keep this smooth in here, but we want our texture to be inside the tears or the holes. Now that step's probably the most tedious part of this entire process, and it's going to take a while. If you follow this tutorial and you do this exact type of carving, it's going to take a while. It's, like I mentioned, it's quite tedious. So next, what we're going to do after we did this step here is we're going to grab a small pear shader. And we're going to work a few areas around the outside of the tears or the skin here. So what I like to use here is a F902 and a P233. You can see there's quite a difference between the diameter of the two. The majority of the work we're going to be using is with the smaller one, and in some of the more open areas we'll come in with the bigger pear shader and just do a little bit of indentation. So at this stage, we can begin bringing our carving to life with a B60 and a B822 undercut bevelers. This one here is a B60. This is the 822. Again, quite a big difference in size. We're only going to be using the 822 to come into these areas here that come under that are pulled or stretched from the holes. And then we're going to come around the edge with the bigger beveler and undercut a good part of these tear outs that you see here. We're not going to go the whole perimeter on all of them. You want to have some variation to give you some definition when you come back and do your coloration later on. Now, when you go in and you use the B60, you're going to push this leather around. Don't be afraid of doing that. It's just going to add more definition to the piece. Also, don't be afraid to hammer away. You want to get in there and really lift up the leather. Now, I probably showed you this before in one of my last videos. I have a custom tool here that I made from a screwdriver. What I did is I grounded it off and created a kind of a hook and then sharpened it on a sharpening stone to get in there and be able to cut and lift up. If you have a chance to make a tool like this, it's like gold. This is the tool to have. Now, once you go up to this point, you might notice some of the indentation from the pear shaders may have softened a bit. You can always come back and rework those areas if you want. I find out 9 times out of 10 I don't have to, but sometimes there are areas where I'd like to have a little bit more definition in the carving. So at this point, we're going to come in and we're going to add our texture to the holes or the background here. So what I'm going to be using for this project is an 888-2 background tool. or texturing tool. There's multiple names out there. So we're going to go in and we're going to work this here, all inside these holes or these pulls. And there you have it. Makes a big difference when you go in and you add some texture inside these tears. Really makes it stand out, and it's going to be great when we go in later, add our color and antique. It's really going to pop. All right, from this point on, we're going to move on to carving out the sheath and bring this thing to life. Well, we finished carving out our sheath. Before I get started, you guys are going to have to forgive me. I've been spraying cabinets and I have a lot of overspray on my hands, so my hands have yet to be cleaned up. So the next step of the build consists of marking out the stitch lines and measuring out and building the cross draw strap. So first I'm going to mark out my lines, and what I like to do is, before I do any color work, I'll do the mark out because it's easier for me to see. So for this sheath, we'll be doing 5 stitches per inch. It's kind of the standard that I use on my sheaths because I use a heavyweight thread, or it's almost a cord is what I use when I do the hand stitching. So what I like to do is come in, this is going to be the welt. So I have my end point up here. What I'll do is I'll come in and we'll use the red gel pen because when we spray our collar, we won't see that mark. So I've explained this in my previous video of sheath making, why I use a red gel pen. So I know where my welt's going to stop up here. Now, I hand stitch all my sheaths. And on a pancake style, it's imperative to maintain equal spacing and the same number of stitches per side. Having a start and end point aids in this process. After I run a stitching spacer, I come back and count the number of stitches on each side to make sure that they're equal in quantity. If you don't do this step and you're off by just 1 stitch, then it throws off the entire pattern, and trust me, you don't want to get stuck having to fix an odd stitch. Those of you who run your stitching by machine don't have anything to worry about, obviously, other than making sure you stay within the stitching groove. So, okay, once I have an equal pattern, I like to hit my layout with a stitching chisel, but before I begin that process, I need to cut out and glue up the welt. So let's do that. Before I go ahead and glue up the welt, there's one more step I want to do. This is an important step when it comes to folding over the sheath. Not only does it help you make the fold, but it also keeps the bend here flat. A lot of times when if you're dealing with like 8 to 9 ounce piece of leather like this, or even bigger, when you do the fold over, you get it's almost like you get like a bubble. It doesn't fold real nicely. So we're going to take an adjustable V-groove tool. We're going to cut a groove up here, and then we're going to take a French skiver and plane out from the center. And that's going to help us when we do our fold, and it's also going to help the sheath lay flat. So what we're going to do is we'll draw our center line, and we're going to come up to about here. We don't want to come all the way up through the top of the sheath. We don't need to do that. We just want to come up to about just up by the top of your welt here, and that's enough to get the fold down. And this part up here, we actually want to keep that rounded, so we don't want that to go too flat. So this V-groove tool is set just roughly under 1/8 of an inch. You don't need to go any thicker than that in your cut. You can go less, obviously 1/16 of an inch, but I find about, with 8 to 9 ounce piece of leather, just under 1/8 of an inch is good enough. And you can see it already wants to take a fold. So let's just check this. So you want to make sure you skive the end of the welt here that's going to meet in the center. You want that fairly thin. You want it to come just outside of where your center cut is from the V-groove tool. You don't want that to sit at center or past center, or you're going to cause a gap in here when you fold this over and go to stitch up. You're not going to be able to smooth that edge out. You're going to have a gap in there. All right, we're good. We're going to glue this up. We're going to come back with our stitching chisel and hit our holes. All right, with the stitch holes chiseled in, it's now time to create the cross draw loop. Taking a piece of scrap leather, about the same thickness as a sheath, I'm going to measure the sheath's folded width. The reason we do this is because the fold plus the thickness of the leather increases the length. So you don't want to get this measurement flat. It won't be accurate, it'll be too tight. Once achieved, we're going to add 1/4 inch to 3/8 of an inch to each end to provide enough of a gap to clear the sheath to get the belt through. If your loop is too tight, then your customer's going to fight to feed the belt, or you're going to have trouble lining up your stitch holes when threading the sheath. All right, let's get started. Okay, the cross draw loop is finished. I did do a little bit of chiseling out on the stitch holes off screen, but I don't think any of you are going to miss that part. So now we're going to go get ready to make the real magic happen by adding color to this project. What I've compiled here is an array of colors I'll be using to bring this carving to life. When I apply color, I usually start from the outside in. So for the border, I'll be spraying two colors. We'll be spraying mahogany and cordovan. Cordovan I'm going to blend on the outside edge to give it a darker edge, and then I'll fade the mahogany out. Next, I'm going to begin spraying light tan, or just regular tan, British tan, and a bit of medium brown in that specific order to develop the highlights and midtones in the stretched areas of the leather. For the holes or torn areas, I'll use a brush to go in and apply chocolate for the maximum density. I want this area to be dark, and then I'm going to come back with some acrylics and dry brush the color over the background texture to get it to pop. As for the middle area of the sheath and the loop, I'm not really sure what I'm going to do here just yet. So let's get started and see how it progresses. I just finished applying Resin off camera to seal up the antique. Now that the color's finished, we can move on to finishing up this part of the project. Prior to doing any stitching, we need to first burnish a few edges and add color to the backside or inside of the leather. Trust me, you're gonna want to save yourself a headache by taking care of these two steps now. So the two areas we want to edge and burnish are the top and bottom of the loop and the top half of the sheath, from one side where the stitch marks begin to the other side where it ends. If you don't do this now, you're not going to be able to take care of it properly once the sheath is stitched up and folded in place. So what I'll be using to do the edging is I have a number 4 edger. What I like to use, there's a couple different edgers out there. There's a type that you normally get from Tandy leather that have just a flat backside. They're fine, but they give you a square edge cut. And sometimes that can be a real challenge when you have to go in and burnish the edge over. If you want a rounded edge, you really have to work at it to round it over. There's also edge bevelers that have a concave backside that's cut out. That will give you a nice rounded edge, and it's much easier to burnish and smooth things over. So I'm going to get started rounding and burnishing these edges, coloring the back side of the leather, and then we're going to move on to forming and stitching up this sheath. Well, we finished burnishing the edges on our loop, and we did the upper edge of the sheath. We also went in and colored the back side of the leather. As I mentioned, the reason we did this step prior to putting the sheath together and doing any stitching is because you're not going to be able to access your edge once this is stitched on, or is it going to be easy to go ahead and burnish your upper edge of the sheath once it's folded together? It's real hard to follow the curves once the thing has a fold in it. So the next step that we got to do is we're going to come in, we're going to wet the underside of our sheath here to help it fold over and take somewhat of a form. And then we're going to come in, we're going to measure our stitching. So what I like to do is I have when I'm using 8 to 9 ounce pieces of leather, especially when I have 3 parts, you know, I got one side here, second side here, and third side here. With 3 parts of 8 to 9 ounce leather, what I do is I follow one side of my stitch line to get the length. And after that, I come in and I add 6 more lengths to that. So we're going to have a total of 6 lengths, and that's going to give plenty of thread to come and stitch this all the way through and not come up short. So I believe that is it. One last part. You saw me come in and mark out my welt here. Reason I did that is because when I come and I glue this prior to stitching, I don't want glue to seep past the welt line. I don't think the customer is going to appreciate every time they draw the knife out of the sheath that the edge is going to have glue on it. Not saying it will happen, but let's just avoid any issues with making the customers unhappy. All right, with that said and done, let's get started on stitching this and getting this together. Okay, the sheath has been stitched. Now on to the last two major steps of completing this build. First, we need to mold the upper part of the sheath around the knife handle, and then we need to come back and burnish the folded or the welt edge of the sheath. So in preparation of wetting the leather and inserting the knife, what I like to do and what I recommend doing is, if you're dealing with knives, give it a coating of wax. I like to use pure carnauba wax on my knives for storage and for this process. So coat the knife with some wax. Come in, if you have any stretch wrap or something similar, give it a good wrap. That keeps the moisture off of the steel. Last thing you want to do is insert plain steel in a wet sheath and let it sit overnight. You're not going to be happy. Your customer's not going to be happy. So we'll give it a wrap. We'll wet this, insert it in, and then we're going to come in and we're going to wrap this with the shrink wrap around the knife handle, and that's going to mold it real nice and keep the knife tight so it don't drop out of the sheath. That's it. Let's get started. So What are your thoughts on this project? Leave me a comment and let me know what you liked. Be sure to hit that subscribe button now and give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this content, as it helps the YouTube algorithm recommend my videos for other viewers. I hope this tutorial helps you on your next project. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.